and then we'll start the webinar.
Woohoo. Did you start
Woohoo!
the?
Yes, I
Oh,
did.
you did hit it. Okay. I was gonna click the button.
Very cool. Very cool. Let's see. Hello, welcome, welcome. Give some people a few minutes to come on in. So excited. I don't know how it is. Where I first of all, I have to tell Stacy because I don't think she knows this. You rode the LIRR for a while,
Oh
right?
my goodness.
I'm not
Did I
surprised by
ever?
that. I'm
Did
not
I
surprised
ever?
because
Because
you went to Stony Brook, right?
I was at Stony Brook, so this was my life for quite a while.
I'm
You
so
know,
sorry you had to
I got
ride the
this is
LIRR.
what is it? This is the train to Port Jefferson. The next stop is Syosset. Yeah, so I hearing that for long periods of my life. I still replay it every once in a while. And I want to put it into a book where creepy Long Island Railroad.
Oh
The
my
next stop
god.
is yes. So
All
that was
right.
like 4 something years of my life there doing that. Yeah.
Oh god.
So I don't know if they called it. Oh, hello. What is the lovely map behind me? So in honor of Ring Shout, I put an old map of Macon, Georgia behind me because
Ah.
I so a few things before we get going. We'll just give it a few more seconds for people to come in. And thank you, Michelle, by the way, for engaging with us through the chat. I'm going to do a few housekeeping rules in a second. So welcome virtually to Syosset Public Library. Which is accessible from the LIRR if you live in the Syosset in the New York area. This is one of our Summer Scares events, and what Stacy, my lovely coworker, and I have been doing is we've kind of been theming these events. So I'll usually put up some sort of related background, and then have something in my name that indicates something about what we're going to do today. And considering that a film has something to do with Ring Shout, I put former film theory major in there because my film theory teacher did not make us watch Birth of a Nation, but we did have to talk about it. So I was well aware of it because of my film theory background. So anyway, okay, well, we're going to get started, and anybody who trickles in after this can, just be caught up. Once again, welcome to Syosset Public Library virtually, the Summer Scares event. My name is Jessica. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist at Syosset Public Library. My coworker is...
I'm Stacy. I'm a Reader Services Librarian at the library.
And this event is in webinar mode. So just to let everybody know, you can engage with the author and each other through chat and Q&A. However, we ask you to keep it friendly and nice. Any semblance of abusive language, hate speech, or racism will have you immediately removed from the meeting by Stacy or myself. Bye-bye. We are not here for that. No, thank you. So without any further ado, I am going to allow our guest to introduce himself and tell us about, well, first of all, you have another book coming out in 2021, so you can talk about that as well, but talk to us about Ring Shout, which is by far one of my absolute favorite books of 2020. And I'm going to put the spotlight on you.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Hi, Long Island. How you doing? Haven't seen you in a long time since my Long Island Railroad trips to Stony Brook, in which I would pass up Syosset all the time. I think I stopped once, though, but maybe I should stop by a bit more often. My name is P.DjeliClark, and I am a writer. I've written several works, and the one I think I'm going to talk about today is a novella by the name of Ring Shout. Ring Shout is a book set in 1920s Georgia, Macon, Georgia to be exact, which there's a map of behind Jessica there. And the book itself is about, it features three heroines who are basically bootleggers on the one hand, and on the other hand, they fight monsters. And these monsters happen to be involved with the rise of the Second Ku Klux Klan. And so the book itself is a book about adventure and monsters, but it's also a book that touches on a lot of issues of American history, issues of race and racism, and of the 1920s. And it is a book that, I hope creeps people out as much as it amazes them. And there's even some dancing in there. So there's a little bit of everything in this book that had diverse inspirations. And I've just been thankful that it's been received so well.
It was so awesome. So for those who don't know, because this book kind of introduced me to it, so tell us first of all what ring shout means. Like, what is a ring shout?
Yeah. So ring shouts were African American forms of cultural expression that were popularized during slavery. It comes from the American South, especially pronounced in the um, the Gullah cultures of places like the Carolina Islands and the southeastern coast, also into the Georgia coastal regions. And what it basically was a form of, again, expression in which individuals would get together, often in secluded areas. And while there was a music that accompanied the shout itself was considered the movement that people did along with this music. And that movement was often in a counterclockwise circle that was not exactly a dance, but something different, a form of spiritual movement in a sense. And so I came across ring shouts in various readings and interpretations. I'd seen them before, and I thought they were just perfect for this story I was trying to tell, which also involves, as I said, magic at the root of it. And so I wanted to include the shout. And if anybody wants to see some examples of the shout, there is a group called the McIntosh County Singers who still keep the tradition alive. And you've probably heard some of their music before. I've heard some of their music in various. I believe it was True Detective on HBO once, and in other things. But they pop up in places you may not expect.
We have a question, and I
We
was actually
do.
about to. Do you want to take the question, Stacy? Because I'm going to
Yeah,
put some links to that group in
in
the
the
chat.
chat.
Check them out.
Sure. We have a question from Allison, and she wants to know what kind of research did you do for the shouts?
Oh, that's a great question. I think one thing was great was that I was familiar with the shouts to some degree. In fact, this song was probably, I mean, this story is probably percolating in my head for years. And how I would think about it was actually to sit down and play certain shout songs. And I would play them like on long trips, like to Pennsylvania, right? Like several lengthy trips. And I would simply sit and I would listen to these songs. So part of it was simply listening to the music, having been introduced to it previously in presentations, in academic settings. And when it came time to actually sit down and write the story, I really relied on work that had been done by the federal government, by people like the WPA, the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s, works that had been done by such people as Alan Lomax and others who had recorded this music and recorded videos of shouts. I re- I leaned heavily on books that have been written about the McIntosh County Shouters and others, and basically a lot of anthropologists, a lot of musicologists, and others. And I spoke to some members whose families had engaged in shouts before. So I tried to get a lot of different bits of resources to understand the shout, which is a fascinating tradition.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And like I said, I mean, that was like one of my favorite things. I love it when I'm reading a book and it sends me on a research like I guess like a research path, and it was so interesting. And I know that, so this is a question I know we talked about because we had you on Turn the Page podcast last year. But so for those of you who are not familiar, this in this story, the demons, the Ku Kluxes, are like summoned by Birth of a Nation, which was considered like the first blockbuster. And it's just, man, it's just nuts. Like I said, my my film theory professor was really nice and did not make us watch it. First of all, it's really long, right? It's like,
It's very long. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, D.W. Griffith had no filters on editing. So it's like, I mean, back then they didn't know. I mean, silent short films were so short. I guess he decided to do the opposite. So I think altogether it's in two parts. It's something like well over 4 hours.
Yeah, and the like few minutes we watched already felt like 3 of those hours. But I remember, so one of the things I found fascinating, because it's, first of all, it's based on a book called The Klansman, and it
Yeah.
is like, it is very pro Klan. And
Mhm.
it, um I remember when we were talking about just what a big phenomenon it was, you
Yeah.
mentioned that that it was considered like responsible for the rise of the second Klan.
Yeah.
I remember we were talking about how, like, as people would wear their Marvel t-shirts
Mhm.
to whatever Marvel movie is coming out, people would like cosplay
Yeah.
at this. It just absolutely blows my mind.
Yeah.
So I mean, where did the whole idea come from of having it be like an incantation? Because I thought that that was brilliant.
Yeah. So part of that comes from I actually teach a class on my other job. Why I was going to Stony Brook in Long Island was I'm a professor of history, and which is why I'm glad that my things make people chase down little rabbit holes. That's my plan all along, to give you a little bit of history when you didn't know it. And so I actually teach a class called Slavery in Film, and the first film we start with is Birth of a Nation, because it is there at the advent of modern cinema, right? For all of these various reasons that you can know from film theory about the techniques that he uses, the camera angles, the use of music, all of these things that would pretty much lay the groundwork for what we think of as modern cinema. But also the fact that this first great feature film is heavily steeped in issues of race, of lost cause, of these revisionist views of slavery, and all of these things that tie into aspects of America at the time, right? So I start off with that film because it will lay the groundwork for so many other films that we well know. Things like if you haven't seen Birth of a Nation, mostly everyone's seen Gone with the Wind, and Gone with the Wind is so reliant on Birth of a Nation's lost cause ideology, that it's amazing to watch the two side by side. And so when I start the class off, I show Birth of a Nation, and what we talk about throughout the class is we talk about issues of communication and theory, right? But I tried to, you got to sneak theory to undergrads, and so we tend to couch it. Instead of going into a lot of Habermas and and McLuhan and all the others, what we end up doing is talking about how communication works, right? Does mass media impact you? And I found that if students don't want to talk about media theory, they love to talk about whether or not the media impacts them or how they are impacted by media, from video games to films to commercials to everything possible, right? And so to ad campaigns. And so students really get heavy. I mean, they get so heavy into this discussion, I have to like tell them, okay, class is over. You guys got to go now. It's you've been here too long. Let's go. And so when I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about how Birth of a Nation seemed to, when I think about the how we have these questions over how do films impact us? How does media impact us overall, right? What do we bring to media? Or is it that media is impacting us and making us do things? Or is it a two-way street in forms of communication? And I think back to the stories I heard about, or I've read about Birth of a Nation when it first came out, and how viewers would react. How viewers who would watch white men in blackface chasing young women would sometimes faint, right, at the sight, right, that they saw this two-dimensional celluloid had such an impact on them. Some would faint, others would get angry. In one claimed case in Florida, supposedly, according to a newspaper, a man actually pulled out a gun and began shooting at the screen, at a figure in blackface chasing a young white woman. And they said, "Why were you doing? I wanted to stop that damned," and I won't go into the brute, "from attacking, this young white woman," right? So we see there, and so when I thought about that, we always talk about ideas of movie magic, right? And how films can impact people. And so I guess I was drawn to this notion of how does media influence us? And I had again that that phrase media magic right there. And if you're a writer, that's pretty much all you need. I had everything I needed to go down the rabbit hole I wanted to go, right? It was sitting there for me to pick up and take.
That's excellent. We actually, okay, we have a few questions.
We have
Stacy,
questions.
take one question and then I'll take another one. Question.
Yeah, that's so Anonymous asks, where did the inspiration come from for the heroines in your novel? And I have a follow-up of what made you choose female characters?
So I'll say this: when I first started thinking this story, before I even knew what the story would be, when I just had, I always say when I just have the archetype, just that afterglow, like this is what I want. I always pictured Maurice as a character. I always knew the sword was going to be there, and I pictured her fighting a monster, kind of holding the sword, almost like an anime figure, ready to take on something. Right? That sense that action is coming and seeing the monster kind of rising from the depths in front of her. And so I got to put that scene in there, but that scene I always knew was there. And I didn't know anything about the rest of the story, but I knew that was there. And so the story itself had to have her, right? Some stories they just come with someone and they come with the protagonist and she was there. The others came along as I went along. I knew this was the 1920s. I want to talk about the Harlem Hellfighters because with the rise of the Second Clan, things like the Red Summer of 1919, where black GIs are being attacked for wearing their uniforms and other things, it's many of them who will form protective enclaves in black neighborhoods to protect them from attacks. So I knew I wanted Chef in there, right? Someone to have been in the Harlem Hellfighters, and I said, why not? Why not a woman, right? Why not? Why can't I tell this story? And Sadie, the third heroine, she was a wild card. I'd actually started writing, and she hadn't been invented yet. And as I was writing, no matter how much you outline, the story is always going to throw things your way that you didn't think of. And I was like, oh, why not her? And as I wrote her, I said, oh yeah, I like this character, and she showed up. But that's kind of how they were formed. One always knowing, the other thought up as I was getting the ideas, and the third simply someone that literally comes up as I'm writing, right? Comes up out of the story like, hey, I need to be here. You need to put me in here. Need to get me in here, coach. And I'm like, yeah, go ahead. I got you. Right. And so that's how that came about, is why they were women. I mean, I almost never know how to answer that question other than, like sometimes why not? Right. That's who these characters were going to be. But I'm sure on some subconscious level, I know that I was pulling on probably uh, authors that I'd been reading from that period, whether it's Zora Neale Hurston and others. I've probably been thinking about them as I'm writing. Of course, they're based on archetypes of women that I've known in my life. There are other characters in there, the three aunties, for instance, who are simply all named after characters that you could find in a Toni Morrison novel, in various Toni Morrison novels. And so, I'm sure there was a lot going on there that helped inspire me to make these characters women. But, they couldn't have been anyone else for this story. It had to be them.
I agree, and I could tell how much fun you were having writing it as I was reading it. It was just great. I'm going Okay, so I'm going to take a question from Alex. The film is such a catalyst for the rise of Klansmen and demons in the book.
Right.
Where do you see the films of Oscar Micheaux? I hope I
Mm.
pronounced that correctly, or other 20s filmmakers in relation to the motivations of the three women in this novel, especially as a story of the South?
Oh man, that's such a great question. And there's so much. When I was writing this, I thought of Oscar Micheaux. I thought of Oscar Micheaux, and he basically creates a rebuttal to Birth of a Nation, right? That's actually a much more complex film that's kind of lost. And Oscar Micheaux, if people don't know, is an early African American filmmaker, prolific for his time. And he sees when Birth of a Nation comes out. I should say this: people don't take it sitting down. The NAACP is picketing it, right? Figures like William Monroe Trotter is actively working to stop this film from being shown, and they're actually successful in some places that stop it because they believe the show will incite mobs to attack African Americans and cause unrest. And so some places actually banned The Birth of a Nation when it first comes out. And there are many riots. Trotter is at the heart of a small melee where they set off these he and other black activists set off smoke bombs and to clear a theater, right? And this causes like an entire melee. I believe it's in Boston. And so there are people who fought back against this film, who you would see many African American activists and their allies would write about how terrible this film was, the dangers of this film. And they would make certain that people that there was a rebuttal. So much so that even D.W. Griffith changes a bit of his film. Like there was one part of his film. I know how much more racist can you get? Well, there was one part of the film where all of the black people were basically put on ships and sent back to Africa, and this was like the best thing in the world. That was cut. Well, small favors, right? And so little things, and so there was pushback. And it wasn't successful in ending the film, but it had an impact on activism, had an impact even on changing something that small within the film. And so, I think of Oscar Micheaux as somebody in his own way. He used film to speak back by making his own films to counteract these perceptions of African Americans, and just creating his own films to show no, African Americans are complex and dynamic, and they're not these stereotypes in Birth of a Nation. And he also creates a film that specifically speaks as a rebuttal to Birth of a Nation, right? Which I thought was powerful. And so, though I didn't include him, he's not included in this. He was thought about, and I should say a lot of things ended up on the editing floor. And so I had thought of bringing in something as Oscar Micheaux as having rebuttal films, but I had to keep under 40,000 words. That's a whole other story.
I was actually about to ask that. I was like, wait a second, because this is a novella. Yeah. we could have had 40,000 more words. What?
Yeah, no. In fact, the original was 45,000, and I had to cut and cut and cut to get it to 40 for award purposes, for it not clashing with my first debut novel and being considered that way. And so I had to shave off, and I think I got it to 39,998. So I was 2 words shy. And I mean, so a lot of stuff there were a lot of little things that I had to carve out. Like there were mentions in there. There's like a whole mention to, I'm forgetting her name at the moment, a black anarchist, a well-known black anarchist. I'm blanking on her name right now. She marries a ex-Confederate who turns into a radical Republican in the South, and they move to the North, and he gets involved, the Haymakers, and he's killed. And I'm sure someone will come up with the name in the panel, but I'm forgetting her name. But I had a whole little scene with her that included her, and I just had to cut it. Oh, so all this to say, Oscar Micheaux, as well as many others, might have come up in here as real life figures of resistance that I just didn't have the time to throw in there.
Was her name, okay, is it Lucy Parsons?
It is Lucy Parsons.
It is Lucy Parsons. Excellent. Very cool. See, this is what happens when you have librarians on hand.
I was going to say the power of librarians.
So people would know, the Haymarket rights, everything, yeah.
All right. Let's see, we actually have a few questions. Stacey, you want to grab
all the questions?
Sure.
Am I going time frame wise of when they posted the question, or free for all?
Go free for all, because I think that we can get back to the first question I see on there. It was sort of addressed. The first and last question were sort of addressed a little bit in the beginning. So go to the middle one, because I think that's interesting.
Anonymous asks, there seems to be a movement of horror films created by Black filmmakers. Jordan Peele stands out in that genre. Thoughts? Is it new, or is it just new to me?
I would say, and this is where I would get into filmmaking and talk about political economy, because often how films are made and which films are made, which films are greenlighted to be made, has a lot to do with those who control the purse strings for some such things to be made. But the notion of Black interest in horror is not new at all. I can go back and find you books from the 19th century of African Americans writing things to do with horror. We can look at African American folklore with things like boo hags and what have you, that there is a lot of story of horror. So this notion is not new. And as far as African Americans, however, getting the money and the green light to make a film and being able to have his own production company like Jordan Peele, that is something more new. But the act of writing horror, of creating horror, is not. And there are a lot of independent films and small filmmakers. And what we're seeing now is it's hitting them. It's getting Jordan Peele is allowing it to be brought into the mainstream. So now we're seeing a lot of new films, and we're seeing a lot of new approaches to it. And so we're living in an interesting time where I've seen films as serious as I can't remember the one. Is it This House? The one about the refugee immigrants who end up in London and are facing a haunted house. And there's also just to show you the spectrum, there's a black film about a set of killer hair extensions. Right? So it seems that people are doing all sorts of things, but this isn't new. If we think back of earlier films from the 90s, I can think of where there were attempts to make black horror. And what I consider one of the modern matrons of black horror, Tanana Reeve Dew, the author Tanana Reeve Dew, she actually helped put together an entire documentary called, I believe it's called Horror Noir, if I'm getting it wrong. And basically, it's about the history of African Americans, of Black people in horror films, and of their attempts to make horror films, and just a history of Black horror, which I think people might want to check out. So I will say that what's happening, I would say that the impetus, the interest in horror is not new at all. It goes back, like I said, at least 2 centuries that I can know of, at least in the literary form. But certainly, yes, somebody put up horror noir. Thank you. I love this. Thank you, Stacey. But what we're seeing now is it's simply getting daylight and sunlight. And I say this, by the way, I just want to go on. This is my little tangent I always make, basically about speculative fiction altogether. Speculative fiction has always been diverse as far as the people who want it and devour it. I have been devouring speculative fiction since I was a kid. People who look like me in my community all loved it. I always tell them, if you want to see some of the biggest nerds in the world, Wu-Tang Clan are some of the biggest nerds in the world. If you realize they grew up on kung fu flicks and Marvel comics, they named themselves after superheroes. So this stuff is always, people have always been interested in it. It's just that many diverse voices have not been able to create it, or at least create it in a way that let me take that back. They have been creating it. They have not been creating, their creations, however, have not been mass marketed. Right. And so I think the question was very good. Is it new, or is it new to me? What we're seeing is it's becoming new to a lot of people, because for the first time it's getting it's getting the type of publicity that it simply couldn't get before, and access that it couldn't get before.
I don't know if anybody knows this, because I just have to throw it in here. Jordan Peele is supposedly adapting into a TV series, The People Under the Stairs.
Yes, I've heard. Yeah.
Which I am so excited about. For so
We're also
many
getting a new Candyman.
I heard that.
Yeah,
I'm so excited for that.
Candyman is always amazing to me, because I don't know if everybody remembers the first Candyman, but it's actually set, I believe, in a London slum, and it's adapted to when Clive Barker writes, and it's adapted to this African American background, and now it's being remade again in a modern day where it's going to bring up issues of police violence and other things. So I was like, I love how these films of horror are basically being adapted to modern audiences and giving them things that they would well understand, which, by the way, I thought was done really well with Lovecraft Country, HBO's adaptation, which I liked the book Lovecraft Country, but I was not prepared for how well what they would do with that book once they got a hold of it. I mean, wow. Yeah, it was something completely different and amazing.
Yeah, and that's like, that kind of comes up, I think, when, there's a lot of I guess you're supposed to be snarky as a librarian and be like, the book was better, but like, there's things that
sometimes the media adaptation's better.
Yeah.
And it depends, and it also depends on who's adapting it, and
Misha Green and Jordan Peele just did. I mean, they just took the very notion of using American minstrel characters and turning them into horrific creatures. I was like, well, of course, right? Creatures of terror. They themselves, as caricatures, if you think of them as real people, look horrific, and they are made to be that way, right? I think it was Marlon Riggs in his documentary Ethnic Notions in the 1980s that he was the first person I saw. I read point out that minstrel characters are not simply supposed to be humorous, but they're also grotesque. And grotesque caricatures themselves are supposed to be monstrous. right? And so the notion that the way that they turn these minstrel characters and make them these things that haunt African Americans, literally seeking to kill them, I just thought was just that was genius, genius.
Which is another reason I'm super excited to see his take on People Under the Stairs,
Yeah,
because
that'll be interesting. Yeah,
man, that
Like, you talk about that, and it just makes me think with the book with body horror.
yeah.
And horror is a genre, but I'd say I love one of the reviews that I read from someone. I wrote it down on my fud sheet. I can't find it, but pretty much it was just saying how, like, the way you wrote is that Guillermo del Toro would fall over himself to create what you've created. Like,
Thank
he'd
you.
have a ball with it.
Because his stuff freaks me out. I maybe I was channeling some Pan's Labyrinth while I was doing this. Exactly. Yes.
Oh, I was gonna
That's
be
what I think
like,
of. Who doesn't think of that? Yeah, who doesn't?
oh my gosh. Okay, let's get back to audience questions.
because we have a bunch.
Go for it, Stacy. Oh wait, you took the last
You
one.
go.
I'll take this one. Maurice's
Yeah.
story is a different kind of chosen one story.
Mhm.
Usually they are reluctant. She is not at all.
Yeah, that's a good one, right? Yeah, she's I don't even know if I was thinking that while I was doing it, but I knew with hers that she wants to have this fight. She's not drawn into it, but I don't want to give it away. But you see her backstory; she's a person seeking vengeance, and so yeah, she's all in. Perhaps too much all in is one of the questions is put out there. But yeah, she's not reluctant at all, and then by the way, I'll say I love Chosen One stories. I'm a big Matrix fan. Yes, all three movies and the Animatrix. If you watch the Animatrix, it makes the rest of the movies make sense. That's just putting that out there for people. But I don't have no problem with Chosen One stories, but I also like when people subvert them, right? And so in this one, I definitely, well, I wasn't thinking like, oh, that she's so. I didn't think in that sense, but I was thinking, as you see in the end, her Chosen One status is complicated because it can go bad, and spoiler, it's gone bad before. You can figure out how that is. But yeah, so I wanted to play around with that notion. And I think a lot of modern audiences want to see that. I know just from my own students, it's interesting the things that I would have thought were great when they're like, yeah, man, they're cynical. They want to peek behind the curtain. They've got 10 questions. Well, why this, right? I don't understand why Batman wears a suit and goes around and beats up everyone. He has all that money. Couldn't he just donate to charity? You've got to answer that now. People got questions. People have questions. Couldn't he clean up Gotham with a wonderful 10-point program instead of dressing up as a bat? So he's got to be able to answer those questions now because I think readers and audiences they've got questions.
Let's see. Just some things in the chat. Michelle says, I love that LeVar Burton reads for that. And then I definitely want to see the Del Toro adaptation. And Stacy and I both said me too.
Yeah, of course, who wouldn't?
I'll take, okay. I
See what
love
that guy does for fish? Come on.
I love that Chef was gender non-conforming. Was she based on a specific person? Her relationship with Emma was amusing.
Yeah, and so it's funny, Chef was several things. Like I said, I wanted a Harlem Hellfighter. And I remember I was thinking, oh, if it's a Harlem Hellfighter, I'll have to make it a dude. And I was like, wait, no, I don't. Do anything I want, right? I'm writing this. And so I actually went to look and find um were there any women who may have passed for men to join the Harlem Hellfighters? And not that I've seen, but hope springs eternal, but certainly within World War One, within various American wars, that has been a thing. And so it wasn't even a spare thought before I decided who she was and how I wanted her to be. And again, sometimes these characters just arise organically. Like I couldn't see her as anybody else but who she is, right? This figure who's come from Harlem, who has that brashness, and she's in the South. She dresses in her suits and what have you, but she's also been in the military, and she was just a character I wanted. And yeah, her interaction with Emma, that was definitely something I wanted to explore because this is an era where you have a lot of radical movements, and especially like, for instance, within just the African American community, there are all these questions about, well, what path now do we take? Are we looking to follow the NAACP path where you're going to fight for civil rights and what have you, like embodied by people like Du Bois? Are you much more like Ida B. Wells when you want to really rabble rouse and you're pushing for those things too, but you also want to, highlight injustices more than anything? Are you Booker T. Washington, who is, no, don't worry about civil rights at the moment, focus on economic strength? Are you the Marcus Garveys, right, who are like, we need a Pan-African Black nationalist movement? Or are we more like the Hubert Harrisons, who are looking to socialism and other forms of communism, other radical notions? It's Lucy Parsons, who's this radical anarchist, right, who is like, oh, we're going to smash the system and start over, and all of these are strategies to try to combat this era of white supremacy and oppression that they're facing, right? And so everybody has all these different strategies, and that was my way of kind of bringing that up without info dumping. I wanted to talk about the period, and I said, what better than a nice little debate that you might find on Twitter, except with more words, and everybody doesn't get really mad and sick their followers on you. And so I had them have this debate between Emma, who's she's this radical socialist ideologies, and Chef, who is much more, I don't want to call it conservative, because I don't think those words fit for what Chef is, right? But she is much more invested in a Black economic program, right? She also has a bit of a flare up with the guy from the UNIA and the Garveyite. She's like, I'm not going back to Africa. I fought for things right here. And so I just wanted to point out that there are these multiple perspectives, right? Let people decide which one they think is right. I'm not here to tell them that, but I just wanted to point out there are all these perspectives that are floating around, and people are talking about this. And I always figure stories should be set in that context to ground them in the historical moment.
Chef is a capitalist for sure, right?
Yes, or at least in her version of capitalism, yes. She was like, she wants a form of capitalism that works, that she says is going to work for African Americans. Give me some Carnegie, some Black Carnegies and Rockefellers. Then we can talk about redistributing the wealth. She said, but we have to get ours first.
Yes.
Right? So she's that way. Yeah.
Okay, Stacy. Oh wait, Stacy, I took the last two questions. Do you want to take these?
Sure. So we have a question from Alex, and he says, so I am curious, since you mentioned it was so integral in the original idea, they are often so symbolic in a variety of ways, but also sometimes very masculine. Why the sword?
Why the sword? That's interesting. Why did I think of the sword? So when I first thought of this, the sword was there, right? It's almost like it's a magic sword. It just appears. And so the sword was there, and I knew, so there's several things. I knew that I want to play around with, I don't want to give it away what the power of the sword is, right? That the sword itself is a living type of weapon. And there are these issues of spirits and history that revolves around the sword. And I'll just be quite blunt. I was writing a fantasy story first and foremost when I wrote this thing. And fantasy stories, the hero or heroine has to have a sword. They had to have monsters to fight, right? And so it could have been many other things, but I wanted it to be a sword, and I wanted her to wield it. And like I said, perhaps I was channeling some anime actions I've seen where everybody holds a samurai sword. This one's not a samurai sword, but that's a really common. But yeah, I always knew she's going to have a sword. And I think I played around for a while that maybe the weapon changes. Like maybe sometimes it's a spear or it's an axe. No, we're just going to go with the sword. I said, I'm going with the sword. I'm sticking to it. And so, yeah, I knew it was going to be a sword right off, and that Maurice was going to be the only one able to really wield it. Oh, and by the way, I was probably also channeling a lot of Buffy, as Jessica well knows, and
Yeah, I think on the podcast I had to ask whether Chef's name Cordelia was
Buffy reference?
Yeah. I don't know if I was thinking that, but who knows? But I know it's funny. I don't think I thought of in Cordelia, but I remember when I shortened her name to Cordy, I certainly thought of Cordelia Chase. No doubt about it.
Bless you to whoever sneezed.
Yes.
By the way.
Gesundheit.
The magic of virtual programming.
Hey, everyone can know.
So let's see. Allison wants to know, any chance of a TV adaptation?
Who knows what the chances are? The rights, I mean, it's an open secret. The rights have been bought by Skydance Studios, the guys who give us a lot of Mission Impossible films, and I think they had a Netflix. People probably know them for Old Guard on Netflix. Uh, the co-producers for this are um, well, somebody will find it and they can put it on there, but whether it will actually be adapted, I don't know. the The film world is very different from the book world, and there are a lot of different steps. There are a lot of things that are rights are bought that you may that just may sit in purgatory, but I don't know. But hope springs eternal.
Allison says, "Yay!" I also say, "Yay!"
Somebody has a hand on it, yeah.
So if you want to talk a little bit about, talk a little bit about the book that's coming out this year as well.
Came out.
That came out this year.
Yes, in May. So this book is completely different, and it is a Master of Jinn. A nice thick book, like a book. And interestingly, this book was already written before Ring Shot. This was going to be the debut novel, which I was signing a contract for Tor for, and it was as I was talking to Diana Fowett, who was my editor at that time at Tor, and she was like, "Okay, that's great. You're going to have your debut novel, but the book world is slow." She was like, "It's probably not going to come out till 2021. It's 2019 now. That's like a long time. The last book you had out was The Haunting of Tramcar 015. Do you have any ideas of anything you might want to do in between just to make sure your name is out there?" And I said, "Well, I've been tossing this idea around in my head. I know it's called Ring Shout. I haven't sat down and thought about it, but that's how Ring Shout happened." Right? Yada, yada, yada. Ring Shout was pitched. Diana liked the idea. And then I had to go write it. And so I wrote it after this one, but this was the book that was to be the novel. And this is a Master of Jinn. It simply is the follow-up in what's now being called the Dead Jinn universe. A follow-up from a short story I wrote which was published actually in 2016 called The Dead Jinn in Cairo. There was a novella after that called The Haunting of Tramcar 015, and this is the novel. And what can I say? It's it's an alternate Cairo, so it's an alternate world story, and it's set in a 1912 alternate Cairo where there are Jinn and magic and steampunk and murders. And it stars a heroine by the name of Fatma, Agent Fatma, who works for the Egyptian Ministry of Alchemy, Enchantments, and Supernatural Entities, of course. And she investigates things.
Ooh. So you have that universe. Would you ever come back and explore more of the characters in Ring Shout? Would you do like a follow-up?
Who knows? I'll just say I call this the Dead Jinn universe. When I wrote Dead Jinn in Cairo, it wasn't a universe. It was just that story. There were no thoughts of writing anything else in that world at all, ever again. But readers were like, "Wow, we really like this. Are there going to be more?" And as they asked, I said, I guess I better come up with something. And I came up with a few things. And so I won't say that I had immediate thoughts like, I'm going to do this next in the Ring Shout world, but I tend to leave doors open in case I want to go elsewhere. And I think I left some doors open in Ring Shout.
Yes, Allison goes, "You left the door open at the end of Ring Shout!"
Yeah,
Exclamation point.
Yeah, I sure did. with a nice nod, with a nice like wink and nod towards the Dark Prince of Providence, who everybody should know is probably H.P. Lovecraft. So, yeah. People like that. Yeah.
Did we have another question in there?
Yeah, Allison asked a bit earlier in the chat, like, I don't know, maybe like 3 minutes ago, what are some of your favorite anime girls with swords?
Oh, man. This is gonna be weird, but has anybody ever seen an anime called FCLC Furikuri?
Yes.
Okay, probably one of my favorites. And most people don't know that one because it's a little obscure, but the main character in there who rides the Vespa, that's probably one of my favorite characters. I used to always like imagine her riding the Vespa, And I would think of that as I played Jizz's Liquid Swords. There's a song and it just seems to fit. But yeah, she's probably my favorite because it was such a bizarre anime.
It's actually one of my favorites. It really is.
Those eyebrows. Remember the guy's eyebrows that would fall?
Yeah, I mean, I could probably bother you about FLCL stuff forever, but we're not
Yeah,
here to talk
yeah.
about it. But
That's
FLCL is
it. I know it better as Furry Curry.
crazy.
I always get FLCL, but I know it better as Furry Curry. Yeah.
Yes, Furry Curry or Fooly Cooly, depending on
Fooly
who's
Cooly, yeah, Fooly Cooly.
translating it. But yeah, Furry Curry, I think is yeah, good.
Ran across that on Adult Swim late at night once, and I was like, "What am I watching?" And I was hooked after that.
Yeah, and the soundtrack is pretty killer. I've seen that band in person, The Pillows, and it's a lot of fun. So, are you working on anything at the moment?
Uh, let's see. The last book I turned something in. Yay! I haven't gotten notes back on it yet. Is a secondary world story, a secondary world fantasy story featuring an undead assassin who is given an impossible task. So I decided to leave this world and alternate worlds and try my hand at creating a new one altogether.
That's exciting. So what got you into fantasy though? Because I know that you have your website, then you have your other blog of that's also your Twitter name. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, token, but like I literally sent it. I was like, my friend who's like obsessed with Lord of the Rings and everything, I was like, check out this blog. Like, oh my
Yeah, this
God.
month of
Oh my
Halogen.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, well, I was a token fan. I think I've been into fantasy for like, I don't know, forever. Or some form, especially fantasy. It's funny, is once I publish an alternate history and so forth, fantasy is like which is probably why I always throw in some magic, whether I do alternate history or horror, there's always going to be some magic because fantasy is my first love. With grew up with Tolkien and all those things. Even if I'm critical, my blog is called The Disgruntled Halogen. After all, it's still I still grew up on that stuff. I can't wait for Wheel of Time. I saw like the little teaser trailer the other day and I almost fainted. I think this was yesterday. Phew, can't wait. I don't know how to turning that into a series. No idea, but I'll still watch it. Um, and so I think I was always interested. I spent the early years of my life in my parents' homeland of Trinidad and Tobago, and so I lived in an area where there was folklore was common, both Afro Caribbean folklore. We have a large South Asian community, so a lot of Indian folklore as well. And so I kind of grew up around that stuff, and I guess I just brought it with me. And my parents nurtured it with lots of trips to the library, my mother's love of Twilight Zone, and my father's love of old Godzilla movies. And so, I think all that stuff was fed into me to just have an interest in speculative fiction. So I can't think of a time when I didn't have an interest in it. But I didn't. I don't think I ever thought I would write it. I didn't grow up thinking, "Oh, I'm going to write stories." I mean, I would write them, but for my sister, for friends, for enough. But I don't think I thought about writing professionally until well after I graduated college. I thought, "Hey, what if I took my hand at this?" And then it still took like 20 years before I, achieved like, okay, like wow, a big name publisher like Tor came along. So it was but the interest has always been there.
Somebody wants to know if you're a gamer and says they are so curious.
I
Um,
am.
it's so funny. So I used to game a long time ago and I completely fell off. And I tried to get back on with like Dragon Age. I just could not. I couldn't donate the time. And then I got twins and I don't have time to just sit and just do it. And so, but I recently, and my wife is like, okay, it's so bad that I'll tell you how long ago it's been. I have an Xbox One, like one of the old, like it's still there. And I had it to play DVDs. Remember when people used DVDs? Remember those things when back in the day before you could stream everything in the
I
ancient
use
times?
my PlayStation for that.
Right. And so I used to use, and so I had it, and I just had like a few, like I had like a few games. I got into playing like the Walking Dead game for a while, but I just could not get into it though everybody else was. And then I found Twitch where I could just watch other people play, and so that was fun. And so I would just do that instead of playing. And so all this to say, I want to get back into it, and it's funny. I'm making myself my own office, and I'm actually getting the best TV I possibly can. My dream is to have like a big TV in there. And so I write on one side and do work. And when I get tired of that, I turn around and I can sit back and game. So I'm hoping to get back in, but now there's so much out there. I don't know where to start.
Mhm.
And so we'll see. Anybody wants to give me some suggestions on some games they're like, you definitely should go through this. But yeah,
First of all, twin parent high five. It is not.
something I can hear them now.
Oh my
They're
God.
supposed to be sleeping. They are not.
How old are they?
That's like the story of
They
being
will
a
be
parent.
3 in July.
I promise.
Oh,
you
happy
get
early
better,
birthday, because
but
it's
still
July.
exhausting.
It
Yes.
is the age of I am tall enough now to reach everything. I'm tall enough to rebel. Noodle legs, that passive resistance. I was like, you guys are great. You guys should go like do like social justice movements because you're very good at the passive resistance. They can simply fall out and like you just really aren't going to go anywhere. You're just going to lay here and go limp. That's interesting.
Oh
And
my
so,
God.
yeah,
That's so funny.
got
My
to do.
son does that, and he's a year and a half.
Oh,
It's
it's
my
good.
my husband was like, "Oh yeah. If you try to hold his hand walking, he just goes down and becomes
Just
one
goes
with the
down, he just
earth."
goes immovable. Yep. We call it noodle legs. Their legs just turn like, oh, good belly.
I'll have to
So
tell
that's
him
like
that.
they've
And
discovered
not
that and how to say no and yeah, so
and
yay.
not as soon as they graduated from their cribs, just started like flipping their mattress and trashing their room every night. And it hasn't. It's
That is
got.
what we are holding off on that because we just know right now that it will be like, it'll be a party in there.
Mhm.
We're gonna look at the camera at 2 in the morning and things will be all over the place. Like, we have to, but my God, it's gonna be insane.
We have time for one more question, but I'm gonna just tell you, like, get like strap the mattresses to the bed. That's all I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
Okay, what are some recent standouts of genre fiction or authors that you found particularly engaging? I've read a bunch of N.K. Jemisin and some others, but where else might folks look?
You can never
Question.
get enough N.K. Jemisin, so that's definitely it. I think reading N.K. Jemisin, in fact, probably her trilogy that I'm blanking on, 100,000 Kingdoms. That trilogy just completely changed how I conceived what I should write and how I could write and how I could imagine. And so I love her last book, The City We Became. Uh, there are, I mean, I always blank on this question. And it's really ridiculous because I can never think of the last thing I read. So let me look on my Kindle. If someone will let me go to my Kindle real quick, and I'll tell you the last kinds of things I read. Uh,
Oh, Allison says
Somebody
the book in it.
play the Jeopardy music while I do this. So I'm always having fun. So I'm rereading Robert Jordan, but that doesn't count. Uh,
It counts.
I mean, I start rereading Robert Jordan every once in a while because I mean it'll take me another few years. So I want to give you the new people though. Everybody knows Robert Jordan. Riot Baby, Tochi Onyebuchi.
Great.
Yeah, that's a great book. What else did I read that was pretty good? Morowe Yehide, Creatures of Passage. Wow, that book blew me away. Um, Great. I wrote The Unbroken by C.L. Clark. Great fantasy novel. It's the beginning of a fantasy novel, so there's a lot more to go, right? I'm completely hooked with Seth Dickinson's the tyrant Baru Coromant. The lengthy books, the most complex fantasy building you could ever find, and I am absolutely completely into it. Trouble the Saints by Alea Dawn Johnson, which is mean, her literary prose, like she and Maroya Yehide of Creatures of Passage could get together, and when they would write it, it would be the most beautiful thing in the world because they both have the most beautiful prose ever. Um, and so, yeah, those I'm looking at the books that I've last read, and yeah, those are some of my. I think those are like some of the top books I've just read. And what am I reading now? I'm finishing up. I was always a Brian McClellan fan, like the Powder Mage trilogies. Anybody familiar?
Oh,
Is
my
I'm
husband
reading the
loves
last
those.
blood. I'm reading the last one, which I think is Blood of Empire. Yeah, Kresimir and Gods, and just that's like my, oh, I just want to sit back and read some fun stuff. So
Awesome. So you said you read on your Kindle. Do you listen to audiobooks at all?
I do. I do.
Yes.
And that's a lot of the Robert. I like reading the Robert Jordan books and listening because I finally know how to pronounce Aes Sedai. And,
Oh,
and all the I was like, oh, that's how you pronounce it. No idea. So I love listening to them get pronunciations, and I love reading along. And I like it when people like read the arcs of my books, and then they hear the audio, and they like if you ever want to like Master Jinn has great audio. But I always tell people whenever you read the arcs, I've changed things by the time the final thing comes out. So if you listen to audio, you got all the changes. When you're like, wait a minute, that sentence isn't in here. Yeah, that's
awesome. And I'm gonna ask a last question. Have you been watching anything that you recommend, whether it be movie, TV?
like everybody, I'm watching Loki. I watch all the Marvel stuff, of course. I'm gonna tell you.
I'm behind on that, so no spoilers.
Oh,
please.
okay, yeah, no spoilers. So what I'm watching, and everybody's watched this, so and it's weird. I started this already, and when I started it, I just was too busy at the time to finish, and so I said I'm gonna come back to you. And every year I say I'm coming back to you, and so now I'm finally able to actually sit down. And I had stopped in season 1, and now they have all the way to season 6. Does anybody guess what this is? Starts with an E.
Oh.
The Expanse.
Oh.
So what's
yeah.
great about it is I am on season 3 and I have a whole lot more to go. And I love that I can just slowly watch it at my leisure and there's more to go. And I already liked season 1, but now that I came across season 2 and see by season 3, I'm like, wow, this is one of the best shows on modern in recent television. So I am devouring The Expanse. I can't wait I'm waiting eagerly for the next Stranger Things and Umbrella Academy on Netflix.
So good.
Same here.
I want to see what happened. Umbrella Academy really blew me. At first I was like, but then I got into it and I was like, oh no, this is great. And that's how I tend to be. So, there's like I haven't touched a tenth of Netflix. I didn't do that during the pandemic where I was like, I watched so much Netflix. I watched barely nothing.
I was like, that was me. I watched everything. It's just one of those like
I
do a lot of audiobooks just because I could do it on my drive because I can't like with a baby or young kids. I'm like, I can't read a book.
Yeah, it's audio. No, audiobooks are great. Or audio podcasts are short stories. Like if you listen to like Beneath Ceaseless Skies, or they have great short story audios. If you can't listen to everything, you can listen to a 10,000 word story. That takes about an hour. That takes an hour or so. But you can get done with it pretty good. And they have some great short stories.
Before we go, I have to ask, do you have a favorite Twilight Zone episode?
So my best friend in life, I've known this guy since middle school. And we kind of bonded on the fact that we both love Twilight Zone films, right? He's a principal of a school now, and so we still call and we'll still do like he'll go no change, and he's talking about, of course, and I have to guess the Twilight Zone. Like he's talking about Eye of the Beholder, where the woman the doctor says no change when they drops a thing, and so we all have our favorite. If you see Flight, the plane that gets lost, light a match, do something, and is lost through time. So he will literally call, and that's the first word he says, right? If you see Flight, do something, right? And so he'll do these jokes, and probably one of the favorite he likes calling to is you're a bad man, you're a very bad man. And so my favorite Twilight Zone would have to be either that one, which people will know is It's a Good Life with little Anthony Johnson, who's like a Q entity who can do everything. And the other phrase he likes to say at times is, we'll go from one to the other, one to the other. And that, of course, let's see who can guess that one.
Monsters Are Due in Maple Street.
Monsters Are Due in Maple Street.
Yes.
We watch every Twilight Zone saga. And oh, there's one more. There's another one. I would call it. I don't know. This one might be. I think I'll take it back. There's 3. The other one he will call me. He'll say like, what was that? The Wind. Well, there was a Howling. I just gave it away with Howling. Who knows?
Oh, right. Okay.
The Howling Man, where they think they've caught the devil. Yeah, somebody, Alex, got it, the Howling Man. And so that's like, so anyway, this is my best friend. This is what he does. This is what we do. We call with random Twilight Zone phrases and see if you can get it.
Sounds like a wonderful friendship. Well,
Yeah.
once again, thank you. If you're ever in the area, please let us know and stop by.
Oh, one more zone. Okay, there are 4. See, there's always more. The last zone, of course, is that he loves, because we know about his kid, we only saw it once in a while, is why don't you play more of that thing you call music? And that has to do with the diner where there are Martians a Martian has come in, the guy with the 3 hands, the one with the eye. That's our other one. So I'm sorry. Yeah, now go.
Please stand up. Yes.
Well, the real Martian, please stand up. And I probably can go on. I realize he also sometimes calls and says obsolete because he's talking about, of course, that. So yes, you see, we should have a separate talk just on Twilight Zone.
I would be so there. And the obsolete man is another episode with Burgess Meredith as a bookish person, and he's a librarian in that one. So
yeah, the obsolete man. Excellent.
All right. Everybody have a wonderful evening on behalf of Syosset Public Library. Djeli Clark, it was wonderful.
Thank you for coming.
And everybody have a wonderful night, and tell anybody you know who might be interested in this. They can either check it out probably sometime next week on the library's YouTube page, or
check out the book.
Check out the book
from the library.
Check out the book and check out
Say goodbye.
That's awesome.
All right. This is who's been bothering me now at my leg for like the past hour or so. Now say goodbye to the people.
Bye. Have a wonderful
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.